So Jesus left that place and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. On the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astounded. They said, "Where did this man get this? What is this wisdom that has been given to him? What deeds of power are being done in his name? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James and Joses and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Then Jesus said to them, "Prophets are not without honor, except in their hometown, and among their own kin, and in their own house." And he could do no deeds of power there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and cured them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. This is the word of the Lord.
Today is sermon number 3 on why the Christian church is essential for the well-being of our world. In the opening sermon, we named some of the church's ugly blemishes as well as its lasting contributions. One of the key roles the church can play is to serve as a counterpoint to skewed values that destroy lives and undermine the trust that binds a society together. Sermon number 2 noted that in a world where people are increasingly isolated from one another, the church can play a role in bringing people together in community. In our fractured world, we need people who will love us, inspire us, support us, and care for us. The church can be that place. Today, we focus on the negative consequences of the modern worldview which led to atheism, and ponder the ways in which, in a postmodern world, the church can help us recover a sense of wonder by revealing to us ways that we can experience God. Theologian David Ray Griffin lists 5 negative consequences of atheism. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the foremost intellectuals in the world thought atheism was a good thing. The church had harbored all these ancient ideas and was resisting scientific progress. Today, leading thinkers more often stress the negative consequences from the loss of belief in God. They have seen that Nietzsche's prophecy was correct. A world without God is worse than a world that believed in God. Now, the first negative consequence of atheism is that there are no divine restraints on human behavior. In one of Dostoevsky's novels, one of his characters says, "If there is no God, then everything is permitted." In other words, without God, all standards of behavior become relative. If there is no God, all opinions and norms must be regarded simply as subjective. Each individual decides what's right, what's wrong. We know where that leads. People concoct stories and call it truth, simply because it suits their purposes. And when objective truth is damaging, then they accuse other people of inventing stories. Because people have no compunction about lying, we find ourselves in the era of fake news. In a world where there is no God, no rights and wrongs according to a divine mandate, then anything is justified. Lying, stealing, adultery, greed, revenge, racism, anything. I may have to face the consequences of breaking the laws of the state. But in a world devoid of God, I have no anxiety about defying God. The second negative consequence of atheism is meaninglessness. If there is no God, there is no overarching principle and purpose for life, except for the meanings that we devise on our own. The way we live, including the way we treat others, does not finally matter. In a meaningless world, people feel empty and struggle for ways to fill the void that they feel within. Some fill this emptiness with entertainment. Some over-medicate to block out the despair. Some who cannot live with the pointlessness of it all take their lives. The third negative consequence of atheism is materialism. When human beings no longer believe in God, they still have an impulse to live in harmony with some ultimate reality or power. Many have turned to materialism, where matter is thought to be ultimate reality. The most obvious form of this is the insatiable desire to control and possess more and more material things. It can also lead to an ethic of survival of the fittest, unrestrained competition for the control of material resources. We often witness people who are continually buying more and more stuff in the belief that happiness is just one purchase away, and in government policies that ignore human and environmental costs. Griffin calls the fourth consequence of atheism militarism. I call it the abuse of power. If there is no God, and therefore no divine standards of right and wrong, then might makes right. One can use whatever force necessary to impose one's will on others. This is true for both individuals and nations. Discussion, negotiation, persuasion, and compromise are cast aside in favor of brute force. Nations are free to wage war in order to impose their will on other nations. Gangs are free to eliminate rival gang members. Individuals are free to bully in order to get what they want. The fifth negative consequence of atheism is neo-tribalism. A quick survey of history reveals the tribalistic tendencies of human beings. Circling the wagons and gathering with our kind distinguishes us from them, and says that the moral norms that apply among us do not constrain our treatment of them. White nationalists justify desecrating Jewish cemeteries. Jewish settlers justify demolishing Palestinian homes. Shiites and Sunnis justify obliterating each other. While religion has sometimes been used to promote tribalism, believing in one God, who is creator of all that is, provides the route to overcome it. If all are created in the image of God, if we are our brother's keeper, and if we are commanded to love our neighbor as ourselves, then the flimsy stilts holding up tribalism can be easily toppled. Poet and professor Christian Wyman tells of hearing a famous novelist being interviewed on the radio. He was talking about his father's death. He was with his dad in his final days. And the novelist praised his father for enduring a long, difficult death without ever seeking refuge in religion. The father was in absolute despair. And as the cold waters closed over him, he could find nothing to hold on to but his pride. Wyman asked, "This is to be admired? That we carry our despair stoically into death? That even the utmost anguish of our lives does not change us? To say that there's nothing beyond this world that we see, to make death the final authority of our lives, is to sow a seed of meaninglessness." Many of us learn to see the world through the worldview created by modern science. This worldview claimed that the only things that are real are those that can be detected by the senses. This worldview defined the world in mechanistic categories. That is, the world was like a giant clock with all these different moving parts in it. God, the cosmic clockmaker, set the clock running in the beginning, but then retired to a distant corner of the universe. This approach torpedoes a spiritual existence because it eliminates all realities that cannot be seen, measured, and dissected. The theory of relativity and other discoveries during the 20th century have led to a whole new understanding of the universe. Rather than a machine with lots of moving parts, the universe, we have discovered, is a lot more like a living organism. And it is far stranger than previously thought, with unseen forces at work. Religious truth, similar to music and poetry, does not necessarily contradict science. It adds another dimension to our understanding of reality. Looking at an experience rationally and analytically gives us the width and the height of reality, but spiritual insight adds depth. It can move us beyond the what of life to the why of life. Today's passage from the Gospel of Mark tells of an occasion not long after Jesus began his ministry. He has returned to his hometown of Nazareth, and on the Sabbath, he steps into the synagogue and begins to teach. Initially, people's jaws drop as he fills the air with incredible wisdom. But then their cynicism begins to cloud their judgment. Someone says, "Isn't that Joseph and Mary's boy? We know their family. That person can't be sent from God." The story, I think, serves as a parable for us, whose message is this: it can be hard to detect God in the familiar. Our mindset makes it difficult to recognize the extraordinary in the midst of the ordinary. Belief in God is essential to the survival of civilization. But can the church revive our sense of wonder? Can the church help us recover the ability to recognize and experience God. Some believe that the visible world is all there is. Do you think that there is more than our eyes can perceive? Some think that only physical matter constitutes reality. Do you ever have the feeling deep in your bones that there are other spiritual realities you just can't fully grasp? Some believe only in what can be conceived and explained. Do you sense that there's also mystery, powers and worlds beyond what our minds can fathom? Some of our most powerful moments in life strain rational explanation. Perhaps you have stood at the edge on the rim of the Grand Canyon and just been overwhelmed with a sense of awe. Perhaps a piece of music has struck a chord deep within you and affected you in ways that you can't put into words. You might have served soup to people in a homeless shelter, and you began to chat with someone who was homeless, and your heart ached for him, and somewhere in that conversation your vision cleared, and you began to realize, this is no stranger, this is my brother. Some never glimpse God because God doesn't show up where and how they desire. They yearn for a supernatural miracle that will knock their socks off, rather than the miracle of a sunrise and its promise of a new day, or the miracle of forgiveness in the midst of extreme hatred, or detecting the words of God in a verse of Scripture, a poem, a parable, or a prayer. Whispers that shape and reshape us. Writer Courtney Martin reminds us that not all spiritual experiences take place in beautiful sanctuaries or on sun-dappled mountain passes. Some are outrageously mundane, yet they still possess transformative power. Some of them keep us connected. Some of them keep us alive. When have you felt the presence of God? In God's breathtaking creation? In personal prayer and reflection? When a passage of Scripture came alive for you? When an act of compassion put a knot in your throat? Deep within each of us is a subtle energy that animates our soul. God's Spirit working within our body, mind, and soul produces a yearning to connect with God's Spirit in others. It prompts delight in the face of beauty. It encourages us to cherish loving relationships. It moves us to feel empathy for someone who suffers. It causes us to rejoice at the triumph of justice. And it sparks feelings of hope even in our darkest moments. Poet Mary Oliver says that our work is loving the world, which is mostly standing still and learning to be astonished. In her poem entitled Praying, she writes, "It doesn't have to be the blue iris. It could be weeds in a vacant lot, or a few small stones. Just pay attention. Then patch a few words together. And don't try to make them elaborate. This isn't a contest, but rather the doorway into thanks, and a silence in which another voice may speak." I think most of us either rush through our days ricocheting from one activity to the next, or we sleepwalk through our waking hours. Can we learn to pay attention in order to glimpse the extraordinary in the midst of the ordinary? Can we learn to tune our ears to the whispers that emerge within us? Can you, will you allow your sense of wonder to blossom?